I was thinking about something a little while ago, and that is, what did Jesus mean when he said, "Don't throw your pearls before swine"? Well, it's obvious what he meant. Basically, what he was saying was, don't waste your time with assholes. Don't waste your time with pigs, with swine. And of course, when he refers to pearls, he's talking about truth. He's talking about divine teaching, eternal truths, principles, etc. And so when you try to argue with a pig, you're basically throwing the wisdom to the mud. Because what is the kingdom of the pigs? The kingdom of the pigs, the territory of the pig is mud. The pig rolls around in the mud. That's his territory. And so when you state something that is true, when you're stating a principle that is true, and you're talking to a pig, your argument, the truth that you are expressing, is going to go to the mud. It's going to be taken to where the pig rules, and you're not going to win the argument. That's the thing. You're not going to win the argument because now you're in the pig's territory. It's kind of like a saying that I heard. I think this was from Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, "Never wrestle with a pig because the pig will simply take you down to the mud, and that is where he rules. That's his territory. You're not going to win." And the reason why is because no matter how much evidence you present to the pig is going to twist things, and the pig is going to deflect, try to turn it on you, and the pig is just going to simply deny the evidence that you are presenting to him or her. Could be a female pig. And so it reminds me of a saying. I think this was from Mark Twain. He said something like, "Never wrestle with a pig because the pig is simply going to take you down to the mud, and that is his territory. You're never going to win." There's also a Balkan saying, and I say this is a Balkan saying because I first heard this from a Croatian kickboxer by the name of Mirko Krokop. I think his real name was Mirko Filipovic, but everybody called him Krokop because I think he was a Croatian police officer. Anyway, he was a great fighter. Excellent fighter. And I watched an interview of his over a decade ago in which he said, never argue with, or he said something like, if you argue with an idiot, the people watching you argue won't tell the difference between you and the idiot. And I said this in a video, and somebody told me that this was actually a very common saying amongst people living in the Balkans. So yeah, there's a Balkan saying, if you argue with an idiot, no one can tell the difference between you and the idiot that you're trying to argue with. And so when you throw your pearls before swine, you are throwing your truth, or not your truth in a relativistic sense, but you're throwing your evidence to the mud, where the pig rules, where the pig can take the evidence and deny it and tear it up or twist things and deceive other people, and to really just confuse people and to confound the evidence into the realm of deception. And so I know it may sound redundant for me to bring up Frank Atwood, but this is what I'm referring to. And for those of you who don't know, Frank Atwood was, and I say was because the state of Arizona executed him, Frank Atwood was a rapist, a pedophile, and a murderer. He raped an 8-year-old boy in the early 1980s. He was sentenced to 5 years in a crazy house for criminals, and after serving 3 of those years, he was released on parole. And what did he do after being released? He went to Arizona, where he kidnapped and murdered an 8-year-old girl by the name of Vicky Hoskinson. In the early 2000s, Frank Atwood had a conversion to Eastern Orthodoxy, or at least that's what he said. He said that he converted to Eastern Orthodoxy. And he became something of a hero and a martyr for numerous Eastern Orthodox Christians in North America and also in Greece and Cyprus. And they began to hail him as some kind of hero, as some kind of monk for the faith who was being persecuted by an evil government. But then when you actually look at the evidence, you look at the fact that he would boast about fooling psychiatrists and manipulating people, the fact that the psychiatrist who was hired by Atwood's lawyer, Stanton Bloom, said herself that Atwood was a manipulator. Really goes to show you that this guy was fooling all of these Christians into thinking that he was some kind of poor, persecuted monk. And they will sit there and describe this guy as a monk. And you see the video of these Christians, Eastern Orthodox Christians, making the sign of the cross and kissing this guy's carcass. And this guy was rotting in prison. He was rotting in death row for 30 years. He had all the time in the world. He had all the time to study about Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And he had enough time to really make up this image that he was this Christian man. And how many times have we seen this game being played? How many times have we seen or heard about serial killers and murderers saying that they found a conversion, they found the Lord? This is a typical trick that they play. Edmund Kemper played the same game. Oh, yes, I found the Lord. And if I could, I would go to a third world country and preach the gospel to a bunch of indigenous people. When the right answer for someone who has truly been converted would be to say, I deserve to be in prison. Not to say, oh yeah, I want to be a missionary. And this scoundrel, Atwood, raped an 8-year-old boy. And this was something that he never denied. And he should, if he really converted, he should have said, I deserve what I'm getting. Because the thief on the cross wasn't a murderer. He was a thief. And even with that crime, he said, I deserve what I'm getting. So I think it's fair enough to say that if Atwood really converted, he would have said, I deserve what I'm getting. Not sitting there appealing. And he said, first he told his lawyer, don't bring up mental illness. Don't tell them that I'm mentally ill. Because what's one of the biggest ways that lawyers defend their clients? They always say, he was mentally ill. He had a sex disorder. He had a disorder that made him sexually sadistic and all this sick stuff. And Atwood told his lawyer, never bring up mental illness. Don't bring up mental illness. So the lawyer said, okay, fine. I'm not going to bring up mental illness. And after he was sentenced to death and he tried to appeal it, he said, what? He said, my lawyer did not defend me adequately enough because he didn't bring up mental illness. Well, how is this an honest person? If he tells his lawyer one moment, don't bring up mental illness, and then he tells his lawyer the next moment, and then he says, oh, my lawyer didn't defend me properly enough. There's a contradiction in his narrative. There's a contradiction in his argument. When they were investigating the crime, they found pink paint from the girl's bicycle on his car's bumper. And they found metal from his car's bumper on Vicky Hoskinson's bicycle. And they both matched. And he said, well, no, there was no pink paint on my bumper. And then he conceded, well, there was pink paint on my bumper, but somebody put it there. It's not from the bike. Well, which one is it? All of these contradictions, trying to use the law, trying to find loopholes. This has all of the trademarks of a criminal who's trying to escape justice. But if I bring up the evidence to the fanatics who follow Atwood, and make no mistake about it, these people are fanatics, they will simply deny everything that I say. And trying to argue with such people is the equivalent to throwing pearls to pigs. You're only putting the evidence in the mud where the pigs rule. That's not where you rule, that's where the pigs rule. It's a waste of time to try to argue with people. I'll give you guys one example. There was an Eastern Orthodox woman who wrote me saying that there was evidence that the court refused to hear. And I looked into this sort of thing, and basically what the court said was, we don't have to hear him because Atwood's defense failed to prove how any of the supposed new evidence would change the conclusion of the trial. That's the reason why. The guy had 30 years. He was sitting there for 30 years rotting and constantly appealing his death sentence. And that's why he was able to stay alive for 30 years, for 3 more decades. And but this woman said, oh, there was some new evidence. Well, what's the evidence? And I said, well, what is the evidence? Well, the evidence is that there was some kind of evidence, internal evidence that showed that he was innocent or something like that. And I simply asked her, can you give me a link demonstrating this? Give me an article. Give me some kind of evidence. Give me a PDF file, something. And she said, well, there is none because this information is coming from Atwood's legal team. So let me get this straight. You're saying that this guy is innocent because his legal team says that he is. Well, how the hell does that make any sense? How does that make any sense? That's like going to Ted Bundy before he was found guilty and listening to Ted Bundy saying, I'm an innocent man. And yes, you can find video of him saying this. I'm an innocent man. The court will prove it. He was so confident. He was so assured of himself that he gave this impression that he was so assured of himself, so confident that he was innocent. And then you come out and say, well, Ted Bundy's innocent. Why? Well, because he says he's innocent. Charles Manson is innocent. Why? Because he says he's innocent. Well, how many people say they're innocent in prison? Almost everybody in there says they're innocent. So what kind of insanity, what kind of bullshit is this? It's not an argument. But if I say, give me some evidence, they say, I don't have to. That's the legal team. I can't argue with you. Why? Because there's no point in arguing with you. We live in 2 different universes. And then you have Greek Orthodox Christians saying, well, even if he was found guilty, we would still defend him because we are against the death penalty. So then there's no point of you even making the argument that he's innocent. Because in your mind, he shouldn't be executed even if he was guilty. And with such a person, I can't reason with. With such a person, I cannot reason. Because we live in 2 different universes. And then you have the morons who come out and say, well, we're all worthy of, in the eyes of God, we're all worthy of, in the eyes of God. Oh, you're so zealous. You're so righteous. You're so pious and compassionate. Oh, yes, you're so just filled with the love of humanity. In your warped view, the 13-year-old boy who is checking out a girl's ass, because that's what men do. I mean, it's just natural for men to like women, right? I think I don't have to give you a freaking PowerPoint presentation to prove that, okay? The 12-year-old or 13-year-old teenager who's checking out girls is no different than Edmund Kemper, who murdered his mother, and I'm pretty certain he was a cannibal. The 13-year-old boy who is in middle school, who's like, oh yeah, those girls are really hot. That he's no different than Leonard Lake, who kidnapped women, brought them to his bunker, and tortured them and raped them and murdered them. That's what you're telling me. If you think that, I can't reason with you because we live in 2 different universes. Well, in the eyes of God, in the eyes of your God, I don't worship your God. You worship a schizophrenic, bipolar God. Because my God believes in justice. My God establishes and affirms justice. And in justice, what do we find? We always find proportionality. If somebody steals an apple because his family is starving, we don't say that person is the same as Ted Bundy. If we did, we would be insane. There would be no justice. Because the guy who steals an apple to feed his starving family would be then considered no different than a serial killer. And then we would say, oh, he's worthy of death. Well, that's not justice. That's insanity. That's tyranny, actually. Their God, believe it or not, the people who say, oh, I'm so compassionate, because in the eyes of God, everybody's worthy. Those people are actually tyrannical. They worship a tyrannical God. because their God says that the old woman who's been going to church every Sunday her whole life and prays the rosary is no different than somebody who goes than the L.A. Stalker Richard Ramirez. That's what your God believes. And if your God believes that, you worship a schizophrenic God. You don't worship a compassionate God. You worship a tyrannical God. Do you know who thinks this way? The mob. A mob comes along and says, and there's a great film that demonstrates this. It was called, I think it was called Beast of No Name. It's a great film about a little boy in Africa who gets forced into a militia, and he is basically he's coerced into committing atrocities. I think it was called Beast of No Name. Was it Beast of No Name? Beast of No Nation. Beast of No Nation. It was a Netflix film that came out in 2015. And there's a scene in the film where these revolutionaries who are against the government, they attack some kind of military convoy, and they take a government official, some government official, and then they take this a little child soldier. They give this child soldier a machete, and the warlord tells the child soldier to hack this man to death with a machete. And he tells the little boy, he works for the government that kill your father. He works for the government that kill your mother. Kill him. Put the machete on the head like this. Like, I mean, it's horrific. I get goosebumps thinking about it. It's horrific. Okay? But this guy's just a government official. He's just some government employee. He's not a murderer. He didn't kill your parents. What are you talking about? But in the eyes of the mob, they're all the same. Just like in the eyes of the anti-police people, all the cops are the same. If a cop does something bad, all the cops are bad. They're all evil. They're all wicked, all of them. All the cops should die. All of them should be killed. What about the cop who goes into a burning house and saves a little boy from being suffocated by smoke? What about the police officer who sees a criminal shooting at people and the cops kill the murderer? What about all the cases of cops actually saving people's lives? I'll throw that all out the window. All of it is evil. It's all evil, all wicked. They're all evil, everything. So what would we call that person? I'll make it very simple. What would a Christian conservative of America call that person? You would call that person insane, right? You would say, oh, he's a Maoist, he's a communist, whatever. Why in the hell would you worship a God that is no different than that mob? Because when you say, in the eyes of God, we're all worthy of death, you have a mob for a God. That's the reality. Your God has the mind of a mob. Everybody's everybody's worthy of execution. Well, Naboth, whose vineyard was stolen by Ahab, and he was murdered by the state, unrighteously, unjustifiably executed by the state, was Naboth worthy of execution? Obviously not. Not all of us are worthy of execution. Most of us aren't worthy of being put on an electric chair. So that's my thoughts on that. I think these people are insane. I think they're completely insane. They have no sense of proportionality. They have no sense of limits and balance. They worship an imbalanced, schizophrenic God who thinks that the old lady who goes to church and prays her rosary is no different than Ted Bundy. I can't reason with these people. And if I tried to reason with them, it would be like putting your pearls in the mud for the pigs to play. You're not going to win because the pigs are just going to mix the pearls with the mud. They're going to poison it. They're going to contaminate the well. It's bullshit. It's a waste of time. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.